7 years. That is the brutal, unforgiving price she would pay. 7 years of silence, 7 years of running, 7 years looking over her shoulder, and the cost was tallied in a single terrifying, irreversible step. Not onto freedom but onto a vast white sheet of death. This is Hyasun, North Korea. A place where the Yalu River freezes solid in winter, forging a fragile, natural bridge to the outside world. Min Young was 17. Across the ice, the hazy lights of China, the promised land, flickered. But just behind her, stood the suffocating shadow of an absolute state. A regime that demanded absolute loyalty, or it demanded life. The decision was not born from youthful impulse. It was forged in the fire of personal tragedy and systemic cruelty. The endless lies, the pervasive fear, the whispers of famine, all of it became personal when the state reached into her privileged life and took her father. Arrested on bogus charges of corruption, he was tortured during interrogation. He died months later in a hospital bed. Dead, the last vestige of Min Young's faith shattered, leaving only the cold, hard reality that survival was no longer possible inside that cage. That night she stood on the bank, taking one last, deep breath of the freezing air. She carried only a handful of desperate hope. She was a ghost on the ice. She took the first, silent step, not knowing that by moving her foot, she signed a contract with destiny. A contract that would lead her through trafficker networks, brutal interrogations, profound betrayal, and the very abyss of human despair. She had crossed the physical line in under a minute. But the journey to actual freedom would take an incredible, harrowing 7 years. This is the high-stakes game for a single life, and our investigation starts now. Min Young's choice was driven by desperation, but it was also a cold, necessary calculation. Escape from North Korea is a labyrinth designed for absolute failure. And the first fact you must internalize in this investigation is this: the most direct path is the deadliest. Logically, the shortest road is south, across the border to the welcoming arms of South Korea. But standing between salvation and slavery is the infamous DMZ, the demilitarized zone. A cruel, cynical joke of a name. This is, in reality, one of the most heavily mined, heavily fortified and surveilled borders on the entire planet. Fences layered 3 deep, razor wire, and the standing order from the regime is clear: shoot on sight. Survival chances are tragically close to zero. The human cost of attempting this route is staggering. In the year 2017, one man, a North Korean soldier named Oh Chong-song, made the impossible, desperate attempt. Surveillance footage, which our team has thoroughly analyzed, shows a military jeep, traveling at a desperate, breakneck speed, racing directly toward the demarcation line. He was driving straight into a calculated hail of bullets. He abandoned the vehicle and ran, sprinting for his life through the unrelenting rain of automatic fire. He was hit multiple times, his body torn by the shrapnel and the bullets. But somehow, some way, he managed to drag his bleeding, broken body across the invisible line of the border, collapsing into the safety of the South. A miracle, absolutely. But a miracle only a minuscule handful have ever achieved. This path is not a gamble. It is a calculated act of suicide. The other major routes are no less terrifying. Consider the sea, long, brutal swims that demand specialized equipment, navigational skills, and a level of sheer, raw endurance only elite athletes possess. Imagine 6 hours in the freezing ocean, fighting against powerful, unforgiving currents, all while maintaining perfect, absolute silence to avoid detection by patrol boats. The rare few who make it through the water possess an intimate knowledge of the coast and tides. For the vast majority of ordinary North Koreans, this maritime escape remains firmly in the realm of hopeless fiction. This leaves only one viable, yet terrifying, avenue of flight: China. The border is defined by 2 major rivers, the Yalu and the Tumen. They are shallow in many places, and critically, they freeze solid in the coldest winter months. For those trapped inside, crossing on the ice seems deceptively simple, almost too easy. It is the cheapest, the most accessible, and therefore the most frequently chosen option. But every defector knows the cold, hard truth: the physical crossing is not the actual danger. The real nightmare waits silently on the Chinese shore. There, defectors face the constant, paralyzing threat of being captured by Chinese police, who under immense political pressure from Pyongyang will send them back across the river. That act, repatriation, is an undeniable death sentence. Min Young chose China. She chose the only way out she had. But in doing so, she traded the certainty of the border guard's gun for the slow, creeping, psychological terror of the unknown. Min Young's family was, by North Korean standards, relatively protected. They were not starving. Her father, a successful traveling salesman, often crossed into China for essential business. But privilege in a totalitarian regime is a temporary, flimsy shield. It offers no real immunity. In the year 1994, when Min Young was just 14, she came home to an empty house. Her father was gone, arrested. The charge was official bribery and corruption. The truth was far darker. He was subjected to relentless, brutal interrogation, tortured for months while his family waited, terrified, for any news. He died in a hospital bed shortly after his release. Dead, this was not just a loss of a parent, it was the profound, personal shattering of Min Young's last shred of faith in the state. The suffering she had witnessed on the street, the endless political lies, it all coalesced into an unbearable, singular trauma. She understood then that her life was a lie, and she could not remain a participant. Her escape was no longer about hunger, it was about reclaiming her very soul. At age 17 she enacted her plan. In under a minute, her heart hammering against her ribs like a drum, she crossed the frozen Yalu River. A desperate sprint between one world and the next. She quickly sought out a Chinese smuggler, a man her mother had dealt with, and one she desperately hoped she could trust. He agreed to drive her deep into the sprawling, unfamiliar city of Shenyang. For the first time, Min Young experienced a world defined by abundance. The sheer volume of lights, the crowded, bustling streets, the overwhelming amount of food and goods, it was dizzying. She had stepped out of the shadows, but the shadows were still hunting her. Weeks passed. She turned 18. She planned to return home, believing the immediate danger had passed. But then, the phone call came. It was her mother. The news was terrifying. Rumors of Min Young's disappearance had spread like wildfire. People in Hyacinth already suspected she had fled the country. "Do not come back," her mother pleaded, her voice cracking with fear. Her family, she explained, feared extreme retaliation from the state for allowing her to escape. Min Young realized the chilling cost of her freedom. She could not return. She had to trade her family for survival. Trapped in China, Min Young stayed in Shenyang. She began working illegally in a restaurant, feverishly learning Mandarin, adopting several false names to evade detection. She was a ghost living on borrowed time. Then, the inevitable moment arrived. Two men entered the restaurant, their presence cold and commanding. They flashed their badges. The local Chinese police. This is it, she must have thought. The end. They took her to the station. The interrogation began, relentless and heavy. The officers demanded she prove she was not a North Korean defector. To do this, they gave her a written Mandarin test. A test of fluency. A test of survival. Her trembling hand was forced to write, every stroke of the pen a silent, desperate prayer. One misplaced character, one moment of doubt in the officers' minds, and she would be immediately deported. Sent back across the river to face unimaginable torture and certain execution. Everything she risked, every moment of terror, would have been for nothing. But she held her nerve. She passed. It was a razor-thin, heart-stopping escape. She learned later the awful truth of how they found her. It wasn't a random search. Someone she had trusted with her deepest secret, someone in the defector network, had reported her to the authorities. The betrayal was complete. She knew then she had to leave China's northern borderlands entirely. She used her meager savings to buy a fake identity and took a train to Shanghai, where she disappeared into the megacity, one ghost among millions. This close call taught Min Young the ultimate lesson: survival demands not just courage, but cold, hard intellect. Min Young survived. She later secured a job as an interpreter at a South Korean technology company in Shanghai, saved money, and finally, after years of agonizing uncertainty, she boarded a flight to Seoul. She endured weeks of intense, grueling interrogation by South Korean immigration officers who doubted her story. But in the end, her resilience, her intellect, and her truth prevailed. She was granted permanent residency. She made it. Years later, Min Young, now known as Hyunzio Lee, used her hard-earned savings and influence to arrange the escape of her own mother and younger brother. Today, she is a powerful human rights activist, speaking out against the tyranny she escaped. Her story is a rare, blazing success. It is a testament to the unyielding power of the human spirit. But her story is the exception, not the rule. For most North Korean refugees, the path through China quickly descends into a different kind of nightmare, one that is often deadlier than the bullets of the border guards. We must now turn our investigation to the darker, more common truth: human trafficking. Consider the story of Shi-yun. Shi-yun grew up near the Tumen River, living in the harshest conditions, driven by poverty and the desperation to feed her family. She once believed the state's promises. That belief withered and died with the famine. One day a whispered promise of salvation arrived, a Chinese broker. He promised shelter, food, and even work across the border for a small fee. To Shi Yun it was a lifeline. She and a friend met the broker by the river on a cold summer night. The moon hid behind thick clouds. The broker led them through the cold water. Shi Yun noticed the eerie silence. The usual border patrols were absent. A sinister detail suggesting one chilling truth: the broker had already secured the passage through bribery. On the Chinese shore, a car waited. The broker was insistent. He told Shi Yun to ride ahead alone, claiming her friend would follow in a different car for safety. Numb with adrenaline and exhaustion, Shi Yun hesitated, but complied. She hugged her friend, a final, silent goodbye she did not know she was making. As the car sped into the dark, unfamiliar countryside, exhaustion overtook her. She awoke to a terrifying, sickening reality. The car had stopped in a remote village. The driver, a cold, empty face, told her she was meeting her new husband. There was no joke in his eyes. Shi Yun was not rescued, she was sold. This is the grim fate awaiting countless North Koreans who cross into China. Traffickers deliberately prey on the most vulnerable, on those who have already lost everything. They promise food, they promise jobs, they promise safety. Once across the border, hope curdles into horror. A South Korean report, compiled in the year 2019, estimated that 60% of North Korean women in China fall victim to human trafficking. Many are forced into marriage, becoming silent property. Many others are forced into the brutal, dehumanizing sex trade. For 2 agonizing years, Shi Yun endured isolation, abuse, and constant surveillance. It was a suffocating, never-ending prison. But she did not break. She secretly learned Mandarin, scraped together money selling eggs, and waited for her single, desperate chance to escape. When she finally seized her moment, running into the night with her hidden savings, she was still nowhere near safe. Her flight carried her north. She was hunted, stateless, and alone for months. Eventually, she stumbled upon a network of defectors in Beijing's Korean town. They offered her a terrifying route: Mongolia. Going back to North Korea meant death and the torture of her family. Mongolia, strange and distant, offered the only path left. But to reach it, she faced the next monumental obstacle: the Gobi Desert. A colossal, hostile landmass the size of Peru. Freezing nights, scorching days, and almost no water. She joined a small, desperate group of defectors. Days blurred into a grueling, starving trek. Shi Yun's feet were bloody, her mind clouded by exhaustion. Only the singular, burning thought of freedom kept her moving forward through the sandstorms. When the group finally reached the Mongolian border, they spotted the soldiers. A final, high-stakes gamble was required. A man from their group volunteered to approach the soldiers with a bribe. The rest waited, hidden, banking their entire future on a corrupt exchange. Miraculously, the guards were Mongolian, and in a moment of incredible mercy they proved sympathetic. They guided the group to a detention center. After months in a refugee camp, Shi Yun was finally granted passage to South Korea. She was one of the few hundred who make it every single year. Min Young, Oh Chong Song, Shi Yun. Their names are separated by geography, by fate, and by years. But their stories are unified by one brutal, undeniable truth: the sheer, staggering cost of a single breath of freedom. Their journeys were not defined by luck, but by an unwavering, almost insane commitment to survival. Oh Chong Song faced the bullets of the DMZ, defying death itself in a motorized escape. Shi Yun faced the moral abyss of human trafficking, fighting not just for her life, but for her very identity against men who saw her as property. And Min Young, she survived through relentless, cold-blooded intellect, defeating the state not with a gun, but with a pen during a life or death interrogation. This investigation teaches us that the border of North Korea is not merely a political line, it is a moral chasm. It is a place where a step toward hope can lead directly to betrayal, torture, or servitude. And it forces us to ask how many more souls are trapped in that darkness. How many more are fighting the Gobi Desert, the Yalu ice, or the endless terror of the human trafficker right now? The journey to freedom is never simply about running away. It is a profound, years-long act of courage. It is about understanding the system, analyzing the threats, and possessing the relentless will to refuse to live in chains. That is the ultimate lesson of this secret file. The price of freedom is everything, and this is a price that is paid every single day. Don't miss the next secret file. Subscribe now. What brutal investigation should secret files uncover next? Tell us in the comments below.